All right, Pat, I just hit broadcast, so we're going to have people rolling in here.
And they're rolling in fast. I love it.
It's fun to
Welcome,
see.
everybody.
Welcome.
How do I get to see where they're from, Cody?
Well, we typically we just ask people to put that in the chat. So if you guys type anything in the chat, we'll be looking at that in terms of like where you're coming from and questions that you have. We'll be looking at that throughout the webinar today.
Here we go. Here they come.
There we go. Texas, Tasmania,
Tasmania,
Redlands,
Oklahoma, Pat, Sacramento,
Roseville,
Israel,
Wow.
Sydney, Australia.
That's amazing.
That's tomorrow at like 2 a.m.
Seaside, Oregon.
Seaside, New
This
Zealand.
is one of my favorite things when we do these webinars. And of course, today is a podcast webinar combined. So we're visual and we're recording this to release tomorrow.
Oh, Reading.
Franklin, Tennessee. I almost moved there once.
London.
All right. This is fun. People are still rolling in here. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. We just want to make sure everyone has a chance to sign on.
Mexico, Lawrence, Kansas.
Oh, I got a congrats from Jeff. Thanks, Jeff. If you hear a baby crying in the other room, it's an 8-day-old.
Right. Cody is not a new dad because he's already, what is a dad, but has a new baby, second
Brazil.
baby.
That's crazy. Scotland.
Atlanta, Scotland.
I would love to be in Scotland right now. This is a perfect time to be there.
Maybe it's starting to slow down a little bit, Pat. We'll do a couple more.
Somebody just invited me to move to Franklin still, Tennessee. Oh, somebody said it's cold in Scotland right now. I love it.
This is great. Awesome. All right. Well, whenever you're ready, Pat, I think we can get started. You can read the intro and take us right into the podcast, and then we'll do some questions afterwards.
Yeah, somebody just said my ENFP is on full tilt here. That's right. This is live, so who knows what's going to happen. Usually Tracy has like 2 hours to edit out all of my expletives, but no, I don't use those very much. Okay, let's get started. Let's see here. By the way, I'm here in our in kind of the podcast studio we're in. There's a tree behind me and a little creek in our offices in Lafayette. Tracy's downstairs in the same building. Cody is at home because they just had a baby. And then we're going to bring Chris and Amy on from across the street in our other office here in Lafayette, California. So we're not separated really because of COVID. We're separated because we can't, when you're on Zoom, you can't have two microphones in the same room. So we're just spread out all over our campus and all over the area here. So, all right. Are you ready to get started, Cody?
Let's do it.
Here we go. Welcome to another episode of At the Table with Patrick Lencioni, where everything we talk about is related to changing the world of work so that more organizations can be more effective and less dysfunctional, and employees can be more fulfilled and less miserable. I'm your host, Pat Lencioni, and I'm joined, as almost always, by my co-host, Cody Thompson. How you doing, Cody?
I'm back. 8 days into a newborn. So I got a little bit of rest last night. We'll see how this goes.
That's right. So I said almost always because I think that was the first podcast you missed because of the birth of your of Brooks. So we're very excited for you. Congratulations to you and Lindsay and Quinn and Brooks. And Tracy, we've got you on the line too, our producer. How you doing, Tracy?
Yes, I'm great. How are you, Pat?
People were very curious to see you guys in person, and it's great to have you here. We're going to be bringing Chris Jensen and Amy on in a little bit to talk about some things. But first, Cody, what's our topic today?
The topic is questions that demand answers.
That's right. Questions that demand answers. And there's two reasons that we titled it this. First, because we are going to talk about the questions you need to ask yourself and answer when you're in the midst of change. You know, in some of our previous podcasts recently, we talked about planting your friggin' tree. We have a big tree behind us. And that is like making that decision and deciding to do something. The best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago or right now. And a lot of you planted trees, said, I changed my career, or I decided to do this, to lose weight, or to take on this new role. The next one we talked about was burn your ships, where you have to say, hey, the past is over. I'm going to make it impossible to go back. I'm really going to launch into the future. So you get into this thing, Bill Bridges, the transition guru, called the neutral zone. The neutral zone is that time when the past is done, your chips are on fire and you're not going back, but the future isn't quite there. You're still in that period in between of uncertainty. It's the time of the greatest anxiety and frustration and the time of the greatest growth and innovation. So the neutral zone is critical. The problem is if you don't ask yourself 4 questions and constantly remind yourself of the answer, you're going to be tempted to do some very dangerous things. One of which is to try to go backward. Not a good idea. Everybody's tempted to do that. Now, if your ships are on fire, it's tough to swim out to those ships, but sometimes we can still try to back up. Sometimes we can just give up. That's not a good thing to do, to quit. The other thing we do oftentimes is quit and stay. We just decide to rest in place and get kind of lethargic, and that's the worst. That's where we stay in a job and we just don't try, or in something other part of our lives. So in order to keep moving forward and to realize the benefits of change, we need to ask ourselves 4 critical questions. And we're going to do that now. But before we do that, the second part of questions that demand answers is we're going to be taking your questions, a couple live ones and a couple that you've already sent us and a couple on video. So if you have questions, and I know you're sending them in now, that's great. We're going to be reading those and answering some of those. And we've got some others coming up for the rest of the show. And that's where Chris and Amy are going to be joining us from across the street. Anything else to add, Tracy or Cody, before we dive into the 4 big questions?
Yes, we need to celebrate our 1-year anniversary.
Oh, that's right.
This is a big deal. We're celebrating a year and 1 million downloads. So that's pretty exciting.
And I really didn't have any idea what that meant, but other podcast people who've been very generous in helping us get started said that is much better than they would have ever expected a new podcast, especially knowing me and Cody. I think we'll give all the credit to Tracy for cracking the whip on us.
That's right.
So it's been a great year. It's been fun. We can't wait for the next one to come. And so we're celebrating the year and the 1 million downloads. By the way, let me just say something. I don't have a battery in here and my computer's about to run out. So if Matt, my son who now works here, can run upstairs with a power cord, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, and Pat, I'll just take a moment to say, thank you to all the people that are here. That's why we did this interesting sort of live podcast here, is just because we wanted to invite all the people who have supported us and have got us to 1 million downloads and shared this podcast. It's actually, if we think back to 1 year ago, Pat, when we got 2 mics off of Amazon and read an article about how to start a podcast, to think about where we are even a year from then. And it was all because of the people that have supported the podcast. We kept it going because every week we got emails from the people that are on this call and others that said, hey, this is making a huge difference. Don't give up. Please keep going. And that's been super meaningful and super fun to have all these people here to celebrate with.
Absolutely. And and by the way, I think about, we have avatars, people that we know that listen. When you contact us, we think, oh, we think of you. And there's some people I know named Garth and Joy Benner. Now, I've known them since my kids played lacrosse with them. They become family friends. And I'll see them someplace and they'll go, oh, yeah, like that last podcast. So I always say, hey, let's think about what Garth and Joy. Joy's a lawyer for a company. Garth is a salesperson. And we think about you guys. And when you send us messages, it really factors into what we try to include here. So, hey, I've got power. I want to thank Matthew for coming up and powering up my computer before this thing shut down.
Thank you, Matt.
We're off to a great start. Happy birthday.
Right. That's right. But yeah, we do love our listeners. We've got 20,000 regular listeners. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. Let's talk about the neutral zone.
So let's bring Chris on.
I'm going to drop off and Chris Jensen is going to join.
Hey, Chris.
All right. I'm here.
How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great, Pat.
All right. We're going to talk about transition, something you know about, Chris, because you are a week away from moving to the Bay Area from Portland with your family. Half of your family's up there packing. Right. You and your son are down here today. You're going to be driving back and forth at least one more time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we are. In fact, we have a big whiteboard, and it is all transition in our house. It's a big deal for us right now.
Yeah. We have a whiteboard in my house now. My wife took the big rolling whiteboard that was in my office. It's in the center of our home, in the circle where everybody walks through. Mm-hmm. And that's where she galvanizes everybody around what's going on. It's crazy. So anyway, we really try to eat our own food here.
We do.
All right. Let me talk about these 4 questions. So here's what happens, Chris and Cody. you're in the midst of a transition and you're out there and you're working on it. And there's always obstacles. There's always those moments where you go, oh, this is not easy.
Right.
If it were easy, you'd have done it long ago. So the question is, when you're tempted to give up or you're really feeling down or frustrated, there's 4 questions, and God bless Bill Bridges. He passed on a few years ago, but he said there's 4 questions you have to ask yourself in order to keep going and not to give up. And the first question is, why am I doing this? In other words, what is the purpose?
Right.
What is the purpose? And since we have visuals, I'm going to write this on a whiteboard.
Purpose. Yes. Are you going to tell them that they're all P's?
Yeah, they're 4 P's. Bill, I think, had a great thesaurus, so they're all 4 P's. The first P is, what's the purpose of this? Why am I going through this? And I remember years ago, the point here is that when very smart people get involved in difficult things, their logic tends to flee when they start to feel pain. Mm-hmm. And even though the purpose seems obvious, I remember years ago, I was helping a CEO whose company was losing market share. Their product was decreasing in its ability to attract customers. Other people were coming up with better products. And so naturally, the CEO got out in front of everybody and said, we have to build our core software product. And about a month into this process, people were like, why are we doing this? Let's go back and put in our old product. This is crazy.
Right.
And he said to me, Pat, what's wrong with these people? And I remember saying, Mark, you've got to go remind them why they're doing this. He goes, but it's so obvious. And I said, no. When the pain hits, your brain shuts down and your emotions flare up and you're like, this isn't worth it. So he had to get in front of the leaders, the engineers, and say, our product was losing market share. We were on a 6-month plan to go out of business. We would have all lost our jobs. And you know what they said? Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, right. Yeah, you're right. This is stupid. We got to do this.
Right. And, I think about all the people that listen to this podcast who planted their tree after our podcast 3 or 4 weeks ago. Then there is this neutral zone. And this is where you feel the most discomfort and pain. And this is where you lose sight. These questions are like anchors that you have to keep going back to. And like you said, in moments, I think when we plant the tree the first time, the purpose can be really clear. And that's what causes us to actually go ahead and plant the tree. But in the midst of the neutral zone, you start to question yourself. You start to get uncomfortable, and it's not answering the question one time. It's answering it as many times as you need to, and reminding yourself that this is why we're doing this. Right. That's the only way to move forward.
I'm going to tell a little bit of Chris's story quickly,
okay.
And then I'm going to ask you the question, Chris.
Okay.
So years ago, I met Chris Jensen because he was friends with a woman who worked with us. And he worked at a church and he used our books. And so he came into our office and met us. And he was like, man, I love what you guys do. And then he went and got another job and another job. And then years later, he said, hey, I love what you guys do. And we said, well, you should be a consultant. So he became a consultant. He lived in Portland and he'd been doing work with us. And then we got to know him better and better. And he was like, man, I love this stuff. I want to do this for a living. And then a few years ago, we were like, this guy is great. And then so 6 months ago, we said, you should work for our company. You should become an employee here. So it was fair to say for Chris, this was a dream job, right? He was living in Portland, traveling around, working with clients on the road a lot. So Chris, now you are uprooting your family from Portland, coming back to your hometown.
Yep.
And yet it's a mess, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, and it's been a long, long year. I mean, on top of COVID and all of this, our family has been trying to process how we're going to take our 5 children from everything they've grown up with and replant. And this first question, what's the purpose of all of this, has been something my wife and I sat down with my 16-year-old, my oldest daughter, last weekend at Pete's Coffee, and we just sat around a table and I was like, all right, this is how we do this. But we've asked this question and had to remind ourselves to answer this question. So sometimes it's been yelling and screaming at each other. Why are we doing this again? But most of the time it's just, you said something like when things get really difficult in the middle, even of good changes, and we have to remind ourselves the purpose. And that's exactly what we've been doing, is trying to remind ourselves why we're doing this.
So what is the answer to that question for you guys? So if you and Asia, your wife, were sitting down, what is the answer?
Well, the answer has really been to, bring daddy back home. And, I've been traveling frankly, all over the world for the last almost 10 years as a consultant. And my kids have been getting older and older, and we've been trying to figure out how can we get daddy home more so I can be more present with the kids and with my wife. And so when you had asked us to make this transition, it was tough to think about how much was going to have to change in order for that to be worth it. But that was really what it boiled down to is daddy being home every day and having dinner with us every night, is that really what we want?
So it's really about, this is really in the best interest of our family.
Of the family. That's right.
Not to mention you liking your job, but it's like, we're doing this for the good of our family. That's the answer. It's like, that's really this is worth it. Okay, so that's the purpose. And those engineers at the company were like, yeah, you're right. We were going to go out of business. And you're like, no, dad has to be home. We have to have our family together. That's the answer to question one, the purpose. But that's actually not enough. Because people will start to go, yeah, but it's still so painful.
Right.
The next question is, what's it going to look like when we get there? What's the picture of the future? The picture. Let's visualize the end result. So I'm going to write this picture.
Picture. Yes. Cody, did you do any of this with the baby coming on board? Because that's a big transition as well.
Yeah, my wife and I, of the 4 questions, Amy pointed this out. The first 2 I'm pretty good at, and the last 2 she's pretty good at, and I'm weak at the last 2, like really weak. So
Me too.
The purpose and the picture I love doing. Casting the vision of like, what does this look like when we have our next baby, or even in company or business, like here is the future reality. If we commit to this, if we really live into this, I love that part. And so luckily I have my wife who's good at the next 2.
And some people's personalities lend themselves to the first 2. Mine does like, oh, the big picture. Why are we doing it? And what's it going to look like? And then it's like the next ones get into more detail, but let's talk about this one, the picture. Right. So imagine that CEO standing in front of his engineers and going, okay, we were going to go out of business. The product was losing market share. And they're like, okay, you're right. But then they're like, but is it really worth it? He's got to say, imagine when we have a product that our customers want and that it's easier to sell, and we get to build new features and functions and stuff because everybody wants it. Imagine how great it's going to be to actually have a product that stands on its own and that our customers are clamoring for. Right. What do you think it's going to be like to work at a company that's product is written about and reviewed well, and they're like, oh, that would be totally cool? Yeah. So Chris, how do you guys visualize the end of this process?
Well, this is actually one my wife this was one of the first things on her list. We actually brought the kids down 2 months ago, and we rented an Airbnb, and we wanted them to start to see, here's where we're going to live. We went in neighborhoods, and we wanted them to visualize, here's where the school, we went and drove to where the school is so they can start to see what this is actually going to visually look like. And so that's an instance of us physically immersing them in the picture and actually giving it to them. But I think constantly reminding them, you've got your cousins are down there, you've got other family members, and talking about here's what your schedule is going to look like, and just giving them a sense of what that's going to be has been a huge, huge part of this whole process.
And imagine when 360 days of the year, 360, 60, dad walks home. Walks through the door after a long day at work. He's not calling from a hotel room in Tuscaloosa. He's walking in. Imagine your dad coming home and helping you with your homework live and in person rather than talking to you on the phone.
And we've talked about that all through kind of the quarantine season this is what it's going to be like.
Right.
Yeah. Me being home every night and just trying to paint that picture for them has been a big part of this.
Exactly. When I think about all the emails that we got, I keep going back to the plant your tree because I think people did this very thing. And so many of them were like, oh, I'm going back to school to get this degree so that I can have this future that I want. Or I'm starting this company or investing in my own business because I want to work for myself. All of that is about creating that future picture to live into. And you have to constantly remind yourself of that because, if you think about it, there is a model that goes with this and you do go linearly through it. In the neutral zone in the middle, you either move in the direction to the right or you start to shrink back and try to recreate the old reality. And these things are the things that help you move forward.
Keep us moving forward. Yeah. But even that's not enough. Okay, I know why we're doing it, the purpose. Mm-hmm. I know what it's going to be like when we get done, the picture. But this is where the more rational, practical side kicks in, and this would be Lindsay and your family, Cody. And that is, that's great. But is it doable? How are we actually going to do it? And that's called the plan.
Right. Mm-hmm. Actually, nobody in our family is good at this except for my 16-year-old daughter. So
yeah, we have one in my family too. That's my 17-year-old. So what's the plan? So, and by the way, so this is where everybody thinks, oh, I have to have a detailed plan that shows every day what we're going to do. No, that's not what this is.
Right.
We're talking about broad strokes, because you can never predict exactly how it's going to go, and neither should you try. But what you can say is this. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to end of life the old product as of this date.
Right.
But before we do that, we're going to spend 2 months, just 2 months, putting together the platform for the new one. Then we're going to launch the new one. And for 3 months, we're going to trial it and see how it goes. And then after that first 3 months, we're going to go forward, and then we're going to do, like give them 4 big broad strokes over the course of 6 months, and that they can buy into and go, yeah, I can handle that.
Right.
Totally. And this is the one that we were talking about at the beginning before we got on, is like, I think people tend to think of plans in the 1 to 5 year range, or 3 to 5 year range. And it's like, that's too far out there. And it's almost too big of a thing to bite off. Right.
Right.
And this is what I love about, we talk about the rallying cry, or the thematic goal. These are 3 to 6 month plans. Like if I think about it in a health journey or something, it's like, if I think if my plan is to get abs or whatever it is, more muscles, it's like that almost seems unattainable. If I just say, I'm going to order a salad today and work out, I can do that in a week increment at a time. And so I think sometimes we get too caught up in the idea that we have to have this sophisticated, detailed plan that lays out the whole next 2 years for us to get there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So keep people focused on doable chunks of things to keep them in the game.
Yeah.
Don't promise the details, because you can't do that. In the Bible, Bill Bridges used this idea, like Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt and into the desert. The purpose was, we were slaves. We want to be free, a free people. Oh yeah, that's the purpose. The picture is, imagine living in the land of milk and honey. Oh yeah, that's the picture.
Right.
And then the plan was, you're going to have to trust me. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. You can never know exactly how it's going to play out, but people need to know that there is a plan going forward.
I love that Kent said musket balls instead of cannonballs. It's like little things. Like, what is it that you can do just incrementally to get there?
Right. Exactly.
Okay. The last P. This is the one that a lot of people forget. And in fact, it probably shouldn't be a P, but it sounded better, the 4 Ps. It really is an R. And that is, the P is, everyone around you needs to have a part or a role.
A role, yeah. This is a big deal. This is one that I think we don't often think about in major. You talk about weight loss change, like any type of health transformation. It's well-known fact. If you get the right people around you and everybody's clear on how they're supporting, it's always going to lead to more success.
Right. Mm-hmm. So the problem is, what we tend to do as leaders or parents or friends is we tend to think, no, I'll take care of this transition myself. Don't worry, everybody, I'll do this. And
right.
It's like, no, that's really not good. You need to go to people in the organization or in your family and say, I want you to do this. Your job is to do so. So product quality people in engineering, I need you to go figure out how we're going to build a product that's going to be more stable. I need you people in core technology to design these 2 things. I want you guys in marketing to figure this out. And once everybody's actually involved in that, it's so much easier to take part in it, because you're not standing on the sidelines criticizing the play calling. You're actually out there blocking and tackling. And Chris, you told us right before the podcast that you sat down with your son just yesterday and did this.
Oh yeah. Last night at dinner, my 14-year-old son, he's second born of 5. And I walked through all of these 4 questions with him, and he was like, okay, I get it. And we went through all of it. And then we got to the last one. I said, well, you know what your part is, right? And he was like, no. And I said, it's your sisters. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, well, your sisters love you, and you're extroverted. They're a little more introverted, and you're really good at like getting other people involved socially. And it's really important for you to pay attention to them as we make this transition to move down here, to really keep them included and feeling a part as we're getting into new social environments. That's not comfortable for them. You're great at that, and bringing them in is going to be your role in this whole thing. And he was like, oh, okay, I can do that.
And people are glad to have that role. Now, sometimes a person is going through a job change or something and they go, okay, I remember years and years ago, there was a company called Netscape, and we were taking them through transition management because a bunch of people were getting laid off. And these guys that were in their 50s were losing their job. And I remember when it dawned on them, like the part thing, they go, you know something, I have a buddy. I'm going to ask him to go to beers with me twice a week so I can just vent. And I have this other friend who's really good at job search. I'm going to ask them to help me figure this out. And I have this other person, I need to ask them to do me a favor and help me with my family stuff.
Right.
Asking other people to actively play a role is good for them. It's good for you. And yet we don't do it. We think, oh, they don't want to help. I don't want to bother them. That's a great way to make the neutral zone more painful than it needs to be.
Totally. Yeah. And I think so many of us, after we've planted our tree and burned our ships, we think it's on us to make this a reality by ourselves. And I love how critical this request, what people's parts are, because in part it actually invites some sort of accountability to you as well. Like not only are people helping enable you to do this, but if you have people checking in on you and asking how it's going, and there's just no way that you can do this on your own. Any transition of any significance, you need people.
Yep. Adriana just texted in and said they should change the P to play a role. That works too. That's a good idea.
Like that.
But give people a chance to play a role in that. And it actually reduces their level of, and by the way, and if you've got an organization and if you're the CEO or the leader, don't tell them, don't worry, we're taking care of everything. Give every one of them an important role to play. That will reduce their level of stress.
Right.
I remember when I was a kid, my dad, we did not have a lot of money. My dad worked so darn hard and sent us to schools that were much better than we could afford. And I didn't really understand it, but I was always stressed out. I knew that the money was a problem. I finally said, Dad, what's going on? And he showed me the bank books and he said, if you can get a job and you can get a scholarship and you can do this, that will really help. And that didn't put more pressure on me. It actually relieved pressure because I could actually contribute rather than just sit back and worry.
Yeah.
Give people a role to play.
It's sort of hitting me as I'm looking at those four, how often in the middle of change you have to keep revisiting these, because oftentimes the picture starts to become a little more clear and we need to talk about it. But I was thinking in the relation to roles and parts in the office, we've been going through a lot of change and transition, and we're constantly talking about roles and how people are contributing differently and how they can better use their strengths and gifts to help us move forward. And these things need to be revisited constantly.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You should write down the answers, post them on the wall, and change them as they need to be changed. Right. And the one thing I want to say is this. It is messy and painful, and this is the time, the transition of the greatest innovation and growth. Yeah, people will always look back when it's over and go, wow, that was an amazing time. I don't know I'd want to go through it again, but actually I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Right. Yep. Right.
So it's part of that process. So those are the four big questions when you're in the midst of the neutral zone. The past is over, but the future hasn't completely materialized. Why am I doing this? Why is this necessary? What's it going to look like when we get there? How are we going to get there, basically? And who needs to play what role to help us get there? Okay.
That's great.
Oh, I love it. I love getting feedback. It's so good to hear people's feedback on here.
Live. This is better than normally we just hit end recording and then we go, how do you think that was?
Yes. And Bill, somebody said his book, he has a few. One is called Managing Corporate Transition, I think, and Managing Life's Transition. One is personal, one is business. So if you go on Amazon or any place where you can buy books, you can find it. Somebody else just said that they use the 4 Ps all the time in their job. I'll call a CEO during a transition. I'll say, here's the 4 Ps. And inevitably, if things aren't going well, they'll go, oh my gosh, I haven't talked about the plan.
Right.
Or, oh, I keep forgetting to go back to the purpose. The 4 Ps is really a great way. When you're a leader and you need to get up and speak to people, those are the 4 great questions that you need to constantly be saying, am I repeating these enough?
Yeah, and I think with companies, they focus a lot on the plan and they wonder why people aren't engaged and why are people getting frustrated and they're starting to have infighting. And I always remind them, you've got to remind them the picture and the purpose and then what their role is together. Like those other 3 help eliminate the misery in that.
Yep. Hey, just yesterday, we're going through a big transition here, and Chris, you and Amy and Lynn and Karen pulled me into a conference room and said, what's going on? Why are we doing this?
Right.
And I didn't realize I hadn't articulated the purpose very well.
Exactly.
And literally after I did that, everybody was like, oh, our anxiety just went way down.
Right. Pat, you always say that, and a lot of people say this, but people need to hear something 7 times before they believe it's true or that they actually remember it. And I want there to be like another study to be done to say like, how many times do you have to repeat something before you're irritated? And I think it's only like 5 or 6. And so like, if you're not irritated by how often you're having to repeat this stuff, it's probably not enough. You know, like if you're not physically like, oh man, do I have to say this again? Then you're not saying it enough, I think.
Exactly. I went home yesterday and my 14-year-old was sitting looking very sad in a chair in the living room. Right when I walked in the door, I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I have to read a book before school starts." They just sent out some summer reading. And I was like, "Well, that's how it works." He goes, "Yeah, it's about why not to do drugs." And I said, and he rolled his eyes like I'm going to do drugs. I said, "No, you got to keep Michael because it's so important. And you got to realize, and people are going to, you know," and he's like, "Dad, I know." So he's going to have to be irritated and I have to keep communicating. Okay. So let's move on now. I think we're going to bring Tracy back. Am I right, Trace?
And I'm going to drop off. It was good talking with all of you.
Chris, thanks for joining us, man.
Yep.
Tracy.
I'm back.
We're going to take some questions from our audience.
Yes, we got so many great questions. So we tried to put them in buckets and net them out. So I think the best question to start with is a live question. So Cody, I would like to go to Connie Bentley.
Okay. This is where it gets technical. Let me try to bring her up. We'll see how this goes.
Don't try this at home.
Connie, can you talk now? Let's see. Unmute.
I think I can.
All right. And you can actually enable your video too.
I don't seem to have that icon.
All right. Well, why don't you just ask your question,
okay.
Connie?
Yeah, we'll have you ask it.
Heck, I put my lipstick on and everything. So I did a very technical thing called smushing. So there's actually 2 questions in one.
All right.
Hope you don't mind. The first one is, what lessons have you taken to heart during the COVID-19 pandemic so far? And how will you apply those lessons going forward?
All right. I love that question. I would say, I'll get started with this, Tracy and Cody, but I would say the first lesson is you have to find the opportunity in the challenge. You have to find the blessing in the difficulty. And that doesn't mean, man, I'm glad this happened, because nobody's glad this happened. But you really do have to ask yourself, okay, so what is there that we can do that we might not have done had this not happened that could turn out later to be a blessing? And that's where Plant Your Friggin' Tree and all that came about. We planted a bunch of trees fairly early on, and we were like, wow, we would not have planted those trees had this not happened. But really the 2 things that we learned from this are that what COVID did is it allowed us to focus on 2 things. First of all, we decided as a result of this, we were going to become a closer team. Even over Zoom and remotely, we were going to actually get closer to one another in our personal lives and our professional lives than we did before. So we got very intentional about strengthening our relationship, because we knew that if we didn't do that, it would get weaker. And then the other thing we decided was this was a time of innovation, that we were going to have to figure out new ways to do things. So I think the lesson is, going forward, we won't wait for the next pandemic or crisis or unexpected thing to happen. We will probably push ourselves to constantly strengthen our relationships and to innovate even before the world demands that of us. That's just my first answer. But Cody and Tracy, you probably have other perspectives.
You know, the thought that I had, Pat, was I was actually listening to last week's podcast, the one that I wasn't on, about how to balance personal and work life, and the hack and the integrating of those things. And I think it occurred to me that in the pandemic, during this time, I think that we've always believed that organizational health and a healthy organization is the most important thing you can build in a company, in your family. Now that rings truer than it ever has for me, because all the things we talk about around, even what you just said about being personal, being more in each other's lives, I don't think if you have an unhealthy organization that it's that easy for people to do in the midst of this, right? Even thinking about integrating our family lives and trusting each other more and sharing with each other. It's become clearer to me that the organizations that are healthy, that practice the 4 disciplines, that build trust, they're going to be the ones that succeed out of this. And that includes professional organizations, but our own families. We have to be able to have healthy organizations.
Right. They're going to be more resilient. And
Right.
just in case people think this all sounds soft, they are, and it's this soft is good. It's not so touchy-feely and silly, but they're going to make more money. They're going to survive longer. Their people are going to thrive at work, and that's going to help them in their lives and how they treat one another. So this is not just a, hey, let's all be nice. It's like, let's create the healthiest organization possible so we can love one another more and survive and thrive. What do you think, Tracy?
That's great. You guys covered you covered it all.
Connie's
Thanks
still
for
on
the
here.
question,
Thank
Connie.
you so much for the question.
Thank you, Connie.
Oh, thank
Where's
you
Connie?
for-
Where are you based, Connie?
What's that?
Where's Connie based?
I'm in the northwest corner of the state of Washington, right on the Canadian border.
Oh,
Wow.
very good.
Nice.
You're not far from Orcas Island.
No, it's right across the water.
Oh, I love, that's like my favorite place in the world to go. Anyway,
Ours too.
Sorry, I couldn't pull up your video, Connie. I wanted to see your lipstick, but we'll figure this out next time. I'm not the most technical person here.
That's okay. No problem.
thank you, Connie.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
What's our next question, Tracy?
All right, so this is a related question, Pat. This comes from Steve Miller from Fresno First Bank. What are you hearing from your customers as to how the pandemic is impacting organizational health?
All right. Steve is the CEO of that bank.
He is,
Um,
yes.
I think our customers are confirming a lot of the things that we just talked about, and that they're actually doubling down on organizational health right now. And because it's one of those things that people were either going to go, oh, we don't have time for that. We just gotta work harder and spin faster. And most of the leaders we talked to were like, no. If we don't do this right now, we are not going to be able to work harder and spin faster. So I think that what we're hearing is that getting closer as a leadership team, getting clearer about what's really important and what's not important, over communicating is more important than ever, and reinforcing all that through really good meetings and really clear policy is critical. Thoughts,
Yes,
Cody?
it's forcing them to be more intentional.
Yes.
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 Yeah, I would just say that I think that prior to this, everyone thought in the middle of a crisis that the most important thing is like technical decision making. How do we decide our way or strategize our way out of this? And I think we're just banging the same drum over and over again because it's true. If you don't have trust, if you don't have the elements of organizational health, then you're not going to be able to leverage the smart side of your organization to be able to make it through. So I think it's just reiterating that same point that it's not a technical strategy thing. It's a health thing.
It's culture.
Yeah.
Culture. What does Jim Collins say? Culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Mhm.
That's right.
And companies with strong cultures, which is not soft and esoteric, but they're the ones that survive. Here's a very practical thing. I just saw a question come up saying, any mistakes or anything you've learned from mistakes? One of the things we've learned is that Zoom and virtual technology is much better than we thought. But then coming back to work, we realized when half the office is on virtual and half is together, it gets pretty hard again.
Right.
So it's easier when everybody's virtual, but you have to be really intentional about integrating the virtual people when half the people are in a conference room or back at work. So I think that I was pleasantly surprised that Zoom calls were very effective, but then it settled back when some of us came back to work and others couldn't. And so that's something we kind of learned the hard way as well. All right.
Excellent. All right. So here's another question that came in. What is the best way to lead from a second chair? And this comes from Wes here in California.
All righty. So this is a great question. If I remember right, Wes is from a seminary. Is that right?
Western Seminary. Yes,
Western
he's
Seminary.
an executive dean, actually.
All right. So the second chair, that sounds like an academic thing, like the department chair and all that. But if you're the vice president and not the CEO, or you don't run the department or the division, people often say, how do I lead and how do I influence things if I'm not in charge? Okay. And Cody, there's a couple ways we like to answer this, right? One is the Stephen Covey principle. Can you explain that? The circle of influence?
Yeah, just the idea of circle of influence versus circle of concern. And the circle of influence is much smaller than our circle of concern. And so the idea is that we focus on the things that we can control, that we everything that we have the ability to control, we take a step in that direction. We try to make headway there. And then we try to avoid focusing on the circle of concern rather. And if you can do that, if you just focus on that inner circle of influence, then your circle will grow. Eventually it will grow to include some of the things that you're concerned about. But
Right.
only if you focus on the inner circle. If you focus on the outer one, it'll actually shrink.
So if you're not in charge of the whole seminary, you're just in charge of one department, make that department so good that people start to come to you and go, what are you guys doing? Teach us how to do that. And then you will start to influence the whole. That's one of the answers. And that's really important because the world is full of people that get so frustrated by what they can't control that their influence shrinks because all they do is think about things way out there instead of what they can do. The other thing is this: have the courage to go to the person in charge. So you're in the second chair. You're going to go up to the person in that first chair, if you will, and have the courage to share your insights with them, not from a standpoint of arrogance or knowing it all, but from a standpoint of humility and saying, I think this could help you. I'm not saying I would be better at your job than you are, but I think this would be helpful for you. Most leaders, I will dare say most leaders will listen to somebody that tells them the kind truth, and they will reward you for that. The ones that don't usually just ignore you and there's no skin off your back. I mean, very few times in life does somebody go, are you giving me advice? I'm firing you. I mean, we think like they're going to do that, but they don't. At worst, they ignore us. But oftentimes, and this has happened to me many times, that leaders have said, wow, you just told me a hard truth in a nice way. What else do you got for me? Right. And that's how you become a trusted confidant to them. So have the courage to speak the kind truth to the person in charge. Focus on your circle of influence, and things start to change.
Yeah, and I think like another way we say that sometimes is always be on the side of truth. Like if you are a person that always shows up and says what is true, regardless of what side it lands on, the leader side or otherwise, then over time people realize like, oh, you're just there to search for what you think is the best possible answer. And over time, I think that gains you credibility to be able to speak those kind truths into people's life. If you're always on the team of truth and you're willing to stand up on a chair anytime you believe that something is true, then I think you get some more credibility and clout that way.
Got it. I love some of the people are sending each other suggestions online. This is great. Okay, Tracy, another question.
All right, let's go to another live question, Cody. This is from Eileen.
Great. I think I might have figured this out. Hold on. Eileen, I'm making you a panelist, and I'd like for you to share your video if you can.
Okay.
There she
Perfect.
is.
Hey.
Hello.
How are you, Eileen?
I'm good. I'm finding my question because I just buried it under a bunch of documents.
Where are we talking to you from?
I'm in Lansing, Michigan.
All right. Michigan State.
And I work at Michigan State in the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
Cool.
Awesome.
My question is, what's your best source for podcast topics? Like, do you do surveys or do you just go with your gut? You can tell I'm from a research institution because we're always researching stuff.
Yes. So Eileen, there's a website that says podcasttopics.com and we just go get those. You know what we do? By the way, people send us stuff, like their ideas like, hey, we like this. And that definitely informs us. But Tracy and Cody and I sit around kind of like an editorial board and we go, what are we feeling? What are we hearing? What are we seeing in the world? What do we think? What is moving us? And what's keeping us up at night? And sometimes we come up with stuff and we go, yeah, that's probably just us. But so it's really kind of a intuitive, integrative process. But it's really fun. And then we talk about it in our office too. But I would say it comes from our gut and then we check it with others, or other people send us suggestions and that kind of provokes us to think about things. So it's not very scientific, but it's certainly not random. It's one of my favorite parts of the job is getting to get together with Tracy and Cody and say, what's going on and what do they need to hear right now?
Right. And I think this is somewhat unique of our podcast. I think that I assume this because we've talked to a few other people that have podcasts and they actually tell us that they've recorded the next 2 months worth of podcasts. Ours, we record the day before they're released, and so it helps because I think we can do things, we can have conversations about what's relevant right now. The Plant Your Tree podcast was as much for us as it was for anyone else because we were in the process of making some decisions that we wish we had made previously and we wanted to plant a flag and do it now. It is really fun and really unique. I don't think a lot of podcasts do it this way. And so far, 52 episodes in, we haven't run out of decent ideas. So we don't know when that'll happen, but it might happen.
No,
And if it does, we will stop.
We have a big laundry list of topics that we've put on the back burner. So I think we're good for a while.
Yes.
Good.
Very
Thanks.
good. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Eileen.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, Tracy, what else do we got?
All right. Here's an interesting question. It says, you serve us weekly with your podcast. How can we listeners serve you? I love this question.
Right. Well, I was going to say something funny. I won't even do that. I'll try to be focused. There's not feedback is fantastic. That's the number one. If something works for you or we really appreciate it. When you send us something that says this helped me and this is what I did, we're just bouncing off. We're like, oh my gosh, it's so good to know that. And it makes me want to do that more when I hear other people say stuff in a podcast or something else. So feedback is number one. The second one is there a feedback email? Yes. It's, what is it, Tracy?
Podcast at tablegroup.com.
Podcast at tablegroup.com. Thank you. Thank you, Carol. The other one is this. If this is helpful to you, we would love it if you would forward it on to others. This is not a money-making venture for us. It's purely an opportunity for us to connect with people and spread the movement of organizational health in our families and in our society and, of course, in our companies. So forwarding it on to others. I think we're going to do a contest later on. We're in the midst of shipping out notebooks for people that sent us good stuff. So that's on its way. And I think we're going to do a contest, like the people that forward this on to the most people, we're going to bring them on and have them be a guest on one of our podcasts.
Good idea.
Help us determine the agenda and stuff like that. Because that's the number one thing after sending us your feedback, positive or negative, is to forward it on to others and say, hey, I think you'll like this. They're usually pretty short. Not this one isn't as short. And if you think it really helps you, then forwarding it on to others, that would be huge. So thank you for offering that.
I'll jump in just a little bit, Pat, is just to say that this really is, like, we started this to help change people's lives and change their companies. And really our goal is just to get as many people to listen to it that it can help as possible. And so aside from, sending it to 3 to 5 people just in an email or sharing it on social media, the other way that is really helpful, and it doubles as feedback, is to rate and review the podcast on Apple iTunes. Because when we get more ratings, it tends to kick it into more people's feeds and stuff like that. So people will be more interested in listening to it. So if you haven't rated it yet, there's a little chance for you to put a blurb in there. And we've read some of that and gotten feedback that way. We'd love that. And just sharing it. We're just happy to have all of these people listening that we do. So,
the other thing I just thought of too is that we're not sure about doing this in visual format. This is a Zoom call, but we have a camera and we could videotape it and show it live. And then record it as well. So if you want to give us your feedback based on this one, whether or not you think it's worth doing that, or if we have radio faces and we should just keep ourselves off camera.
I already saw a comment about that.
Okay,
Someone wants us to keep doing the video podcast.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you for that. Right. Tracy, another question.
All right. So outside of your Kappa Pro membership, what are some other steps to take if we want to become organizational health consultants? We got so many questions around this. So what's your recommendation?
Yeah. My first recommendation is just go share it. Like if you read a book or hear something on a podcast, go to your clients, go to your company, go to your friends and go, let me do this for you. Let me go buy that Bill Bridges book and share this with you. Let me show you what organizational health is in the 4 disciplines. Let me take you through the 3 attributes of an ideal team player. Go be a purveyor of this and a sharer of this. You don't need a license. You don't need a graduate degree to do it. So I would say, don't let yourself be held back. I think that the Kappa Pro program that we're launching is going to be just a great way to let us pour into you throughout the year so that you have more confidence to do that. And so that you have a little logo that says, I'm a Kappa Pro member, part of the Table Group's, network. And so I've been trained to do some of this stuff. And so that's wonderful, but don't let anything hold you back from sharing this.
Yeah. I was going to say, plant your freaking tree. I think the only difference is that if you do it now versus doing it in a couple of years, you wish you had done it sooner, because there is such a need in the market for people to come in and help organizations be healthy. As soon as you start laying out the 4 disciplines of a healthy organization, CEOs that understand the importance of this, they're on board. Teams that understand the 5 dysfunctions are on board. You just got to get out there and start doing it. And I think in a year from now, you're going to realize, man, I wish I started sooner.
In fact, we launched Kappa Pro and people are like, oh my gosh, I want to do this so bad, but I don't have the money right now, or things are a little tight. And we're like, who cares? Just sign up. Don't worry. Don't pay us. Yeah. Pay us when you start making money or when things turn around. Again, it's a movement. So please don't wait. September 1st, we're going to launch it. Join and say, I can't pay yet. Can I do installments, or can I wait till January until I know that I got my business up and running, or until my company approves the purchase? So again, money is not the leading indicator. It's joy and passion around the movement. And that's how we are. And so please don't hold back.
Great.
That's great, Pat. And I just want to add that we have so many free resources on our website. So definitely check out our website. And then your book, The Advantage, is written as a field guide.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Really, all you need to do is read that book and you have everything you need to be an org health consultant.
Or to implement this in your own organization.
That's right.
Totally.
Or if you're an HR generalist, to bring it to your manager that you support and for that department. So there's really nothing holding you back.
Great. So we have 9 minutes left to the hour. I don't know how many more questions you want to take, Pat?
A couple more.
A couple more. Okay. I'm going to do, let's bring on Amy then. And I'm going to ask this question. Amy, can you join us?
Hello, Amy.
Oh,
Hi. This is a
so
question
fun
I think.
to see this and all the comments. I wish I
Yes.
could like them and comment to individuals, but.
All right. So here's the question. What did the first 3 months of starting the table group look like for you?
So that was me, you, and Amy, Tracy. Cody was just a baby in his mother's arms, probably.
Let me take this one. No, I'm just kidding.
And
So Amy, what was the first 3 months? We'd planted a tree in October of 1997.
yes, I mean, looking back, it's hilarious. Like our one phone line with a little modem, and we would share it and dial into MindSpring that way. I was reflecting this morning too. I think, Pat, you and I made Tracy put together all the furniture. I don't think we helped her.
You guys were busy.
We went to Pottery Barn and bought 5 tables and had 2 file cabinets, and we were out trying to get clients, and Tracy was making our furniture and making sure that our one internet connection worked.
When you share that story about passing along the internet cable to the other computers, it sounds like a comedy, like a sitcom, of people trying to start a company. It's amazing.
Well, and we were so blissfully naive about what we were getting into, but it was a blast, and it was hard and emotional and scary, but great.
The interesting thing about it was, I think the biggest lesson was we were so passionate about organizational health that we were like, that was going to carry the day. And so Amy and I would go cold call CEOs and say, this is what we can do for you. And I really do think we didn't have any ideas about having books published or giving talks or podcasts, because nobody knew what a podcast was. But we knew that companies needed this, and that if we were passionate about it, we could spend the next 10 years just working with people we liked, doing something that mattered. We had no idea that it was going to lead to something more. And sometimes people come to us and say, hey, how can I do what you're doing? Like start your own business and have success. And we were like, make sure you enjoy the first part. Because at the very beginning, we said, if we get to come to work every day and see one another and like the people we work with and believe in what we do for clients, that will be enough. If we can just pay our bills.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it was all the little things and paying attention and taking real pride in all the little things, every client interaction, every phone call, every email, being appreciative of every book sold, in those early days of the books. And I think that was key. And then just being happy about it, but also working hard through it.
We absolutely just lived in the moment. We didn't get ahead of ourselves. We enjoyed all of those little moments along the way.
While pushing at the same time. It's not an easy formula.
No.
And it can be really uncomfortable. We're
Here's
kind of there
something
now, in fact.
And here's something that ties into what Cody was saying is in the first month in the first days of starting the company, we found out my wife was pregnant. And in the first month and a half, we found out we were having twins. So we decided, hey, why don't we just buy a house too and move?
Yeah.
We'll just throw all of this into the same bucket. So it was crazy the first 3 months.
And premature babies a couple months later.
And they were
And
born
a book
really
contract. It was all crazy. So
yeah, someone just asked if we had a book when we started, and the answer is no, not a published book. Pat had written the five temptations of a CEO, but it hadn't been published.
And it was just a fiction story. It wasn't, we didn't have the back done. Amy was my editor at that point just for fun. And so somebody accidentally read it and said, hey, I think we'll make this into a book. And we were like, really? So
accidentally read it.
Accidentally read it. All righty. Hey, maybe we should shut this down because we're pushing the hour, aren't we?
We have one more question though, and it's a live question.
Oh, good.
And
I'm going to take off. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Amy. Thanks for joining us for that.
So this is a question from Lucas.
I just made Lucas a panelist here. Lucas, you can unmute and make yourself. There you are. Perfect.
Lucas.
Good. Hello.
How old are you, Lucas?
I am 16 and I'm from Nebraska.
Awesome. You're 16. That's great.
Yeah. So my question is, as a teen like myself, 16 years of age, looking to develop as a leader in anything that I do, what would you recommend focusing on the most right now?
Okay. I am going to say, Lucas, that the most important thing you can do, it's at the heart of everything that we do at the Table Group, every model, every principle, and every endeavor. And it's going to sound theoretical, but it's not. And in fact, that we're going to do a podcast just about this topic next time.
Awesome.
And it's make sure that humility is in place. Make sure that you are humble. And we'll define that more in the next podcast, but it's not just the appearance of humility. It's make sure that you realize that as a leader, you're not more important than the people you lead. Be their servant and never let yourself lose your sense of humility. It's the downfall of most companies and most leaders, nations, everything. Make sure that you are humble and that you understand the real meaning of that word. Because if you're on this podcast and you're asking this question, you're probably not your typical 16-year-old. And so you might experience great success by the time you're 19 or 23, and just never let yourself believe that makes you important, but realize that you're blessed and that you have a burden. And if you keep yourself humble, you'll be just fine.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Lucas?
Definitely love that answer.
And when you get out of college, give us a call because we'll probably hire you.
Yes, Lucas is definitely on our radar. He has been in touch with us over several months, and you're an inspiration, Lucas. I want my children to meet you.
Oh, well, thank you. You guys have certainly changed my life. And that's kind of where this whole relationship came out of, just that impact you all have had on me. So
really?
Definitely.
Wow. You realize, Lucas, that when we started, you had yet to be born. There was going to be like 8 years until you were born.
I do realize that.
That's great, Lucas. Hey, God bless you. Thanks for coming on and asking a question.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys.
Thanks, Lucas.
Okay, it's time to wrap up, right, Trace?
Yes, it is.
Let's do it.
So thanks for joining us on this first ever visual Zoom call podcast. We hope it works for our audio listeners, and we appreciate all the people that joined visually. We'll be figuring out going forward if we continue to do things like this. But next week we'll be on. We'll talk about the danger of humility. That's what we're going to call it, because there's a danger in getting it wrong. Thanks, everyone, and we will talk to you next week.